Hi everybody. Today's video won't be very long as I don't have a whole lot to talk about. I decided to switch world building and plotting because I'm still working on my plotting, and so it's in my brain right now and it's in the midst of everything that I'm doing. So I thought I'd go ahead and do that first, and then I would talk to you about world building next week. So, last week, we talked about characters, which is what over here, and then all these letters down here are me practicing writing backwards. So you guys can read all of those. I know that because I can read all of them, which is funny. Anyway, so moving over here, I went ahead and pre-made my things today rather than writing, so hopefully you guys will be able to read them. The handwriting's a little not so great. But again, it's because I have to write backwards. So, let's go ahead and start today. Sorry, I'm trying to get the camera in the right spot. That'll do, I guess. So, what I'm going to talk about today is basic story arcs. I can't tell if that looks right for you guys or not. Yeah, I guess it does. Because I've been looking at it backwards this whole time. I haven't been able to really look at it. So, I've got two examples of basic story arcs here, and then I've got all the definitions, and I'll step out of the way for just a second so you guys can kind of see it if you want to, I don't know, pause the video or take a screenshot so you can really look at it, and know what I'm talking about. I'm going to scoot it in really quick so it's a little closer. There. That'll do. That'll do, pig. That'll do. Alright, so, this is probably the story arc that everybody recognizes from, like, elementary school and middle school when you talked about story arcs, you talked about, like, synopsis, and what's the story about, and, like, that kind of stuff, and you had to write a, brief description of the story. So, this is a basic story arc. I have the different parts labeled, and they're listed over here. You have the beginning. You have the instigating incident, which I think is spelled properly. No, it's not. See, that's part of the problem with writing backwards. Instigating is spelled wrong. It's missing an S. That's part of the problem with writing backwards is I can't see the words. Anyway, it's missing an S. There should be an S in there, and I don't have my marker. I guess I do. Is that right? I still don't think that's right. I think it's... Anyway. Instigating incident. This is going to be the incident that pushes your character into whatever event is outside of normal life. If you have read... well, any book. Any book. I'm trying to think of a book that I've read recently. Okay, one of my favorite series is the Lioness Rampant series, which follows Elena of Trebon. They're by Tamora Pierce. They're really good if you're looking for, like, a really low-level fantasy novel. They're really, really good. And so the beginning is Elena lives at home with her father and her brother, her twin brother, and the instigating incident is they are sent to wherever they're supposed to go. She's supposed to be going to this nunnery so she can learn to become a lady, and her brother's supposed to be sent to night school to learn to become a knight. So that's the instigating incident, and they end up they end up coercing the person who's escorting them into taking her brother to the monastery so that he can become a wizard, and her to the night school so that she can become a knight because that's what she wants to do. And that's the instigating incident. The idea of the instigating incident is that it forces your character to make a choice. And usually the choice is, I cannot choose to walk through this door that is being offered, and my life will remain the same. But if I choose to walk through this door, while there is danger on the other side of this door, oftentimes there is something that is going to be a great reward. Or... usually you can give your character a choice. That's really good. If you can give them a choice because it makes them seem human and it makes it seem less like just bad luck. So if you can give them a choice during the instigating incident, that is so spelled wrong, that really helps with your plot later on because it's something they chose. It's not just something that the world made no choice for them. Like, okay, say your instigating incident for your novel is that your protagonist's house burnt down and they lost their entire family and they have to leave the village because the village thinks that they did it. that doesn't really give your character a choice. That's forcing your character into a situation. While that's not bad, it just creates less tension later in the story because it wasn't something the character chose. It's just something that happened. So that's an instigating incident, and that usually propels the plot forward. So then you have number 3, which is your rising action, which I think that is spelled correctly. Good. Your rising action, which is going to be tension is building. Whatever is becoming not so great, or whatever goal your hero is working towards, it becomes more difficult. And I didn't do a super great job of showing it here, but it should be really heavily sloped towards that. And I'll talk about that when I get to this side of the slope, but it should be really heavily sloped. Because it's supposed to represent that it's difficult. It's a difficult journey. It's hard. It's where the brunt of your novel or whatever story you're telling is going to be. It's going to be here. Now, and these story arcs apply not just to novels, but to short stories, to fan fiction, to anything that has a narrative. These story arcs, you can find them if it's a well done narrative. And so then at number 4, we have what everybody knows, the climax, or the big. If you have an action one, it's going to be the big final boss or the big final fight, or you're going to have the big, if it's a romance, you'll have the big confession, the big aha, or this could also be the big, we're being told that we have to be kept apart and we're not allowed to be together, and then this is them choosing to be together. The climax of Romeo and Juliet is Romeo and Juliet running away and drinking the poison, getting the poison and drinking it, and that is the climax, is when they die. So then after the climax, you have, and notice the climax is pretty small. It's while it is a pivotal point in your story, it should be short. It should be a fairly small part of your story. Lengthwise. So then next you have number 5, which is called falling action. This is because all of that tension that's been building up at the climax, it should end. It should be released. And so you're going to have really quick, really fast falling action. And that's like Romeo and Juliet, it's the bodies being found. It's, I'm trying to think if in Elena in the first book, in the Lioness Rampant series, that's going to be, I don't know exactly what happens in the first book. There's 6 books. I can't remember. If your character goes on a quest and he has to fight a dragon, and he slays the dragon, this is going to be the town thanking him for fighting the dragon and slaying the dragon, and him start working towards going home. That's going to be your falling action. And then number 6, you have resolution. And that's going to be, it doesn't have to be happy. Resolution is not always happy. It's just the end. It's however your story ends. In Romeo and Juliet, it's the monologue that's at the end. It's the part that talks about how big of a tragedy it is. In an action story, say where he fought the dragon, the town has thanked him. They've loaded him up with gold. He has been made a knight by the king. And so now he's going home, and he's going back to his small farm town, or a hero when everyone thought he was lame, or he could win the love of the princess, and now they're getting married, and that's the resolution. The resolution is to your story whatever you want it to be and whatever your story looks like. So that's a basic arc. That's the arc that kind of everybody knows and recognizes in stories. You also have this here. This is more common for authors to use when plotting, just because it helps you track everything that happens in your rising action. And as you notice, there are a lot more numbers here than there were over here, and it helps you track your tension in your rising action. So again, it starts out with, this should actually have a 1 here because it always starts at the beginning. So you have your beginning, you have your instigating incident. Again, that's whatever. If you want to push your hero into it and not give them a choice, you can. I highly suggest you give them a choice. That's just, I don't know, it's different when it's someone's choice. In the Elena books, they were pushed into having to go somewhere. They weren't allowed to stay home. They couldn't stay home anymore. Her and her brother had to go somewhere. The choice they made was to go somewhere different than where their father wanted them to go. And so that was a choice that they made. And so then later on, when Elena would come up against hardships, She found strength in this is the choice I made, this is what I wanted. And so you find that oftentimes in the climax and in the rising action, it is important that they have made that choice because it spurs them. It pushes them towards it. It's this is what I wanted. I chose this rather than I was pushed into it. Because oftentimes, you can find that, well, I have no choice. My family home burnt down and my entire family died. So I have to leave my village, and life is hard out here because I have no income, I have no family, I have no home, so I'm just going to lay down and die because it's not what I chose. It's just what life gave me, and it sucks. Not that makes a good story, but that's more probable. So anyway, again, in your instigating incident, I highly suggest giving your character a choice in your instigating incident. So then you'll have rising action. And now in this particular story arc, you have the rising action. It happens in short bursts. And then you have this final number here, and it's called, it says crisis, I believe. Crisis, yeah. Crisis. And the idea is that in your rising action and in your tension building, you have small crises that make it harder and harder and harder. So, Lord of the Rings. Instigating incident. They have the ring. The group volunteers to set out. No one in that group was forced into it. Everyone was volunteered. Even Frodo volunteered to carry the ring to Mordor. So what was one of the crises? That series has so many crises, it's not even funny. So one of the very first crises they face is Gandalf. Gandalf gets taken by the big dragony person. Is that the Molag Bal? I can't remember. I get all my fantasy stuff messed up. It's the when they go down in the dwarven cave. There's all sorts of crises in that. So that's an example of, it's not a climax, it's a crisis. It's not the plot coming to a head and then all the tension releasing, because they still have to deliver the ring. They're still in the middle of nowhere. They're still being chased by things. They're still being hunted. So the tension hasn't diminished. It's a crisis, not a climax. So the idea is that you have a lot of rising action, and then you have small climaxes, and then rising action, then climax, and then rising action, then climax, and you can have as many climaxes as you want, depending on how long your story is. And then you have your crises. You can have as many crises as you want, and then you have your climax. And then you have your falling action and your resolution. So those are two very basic plots. This one is the one that everybody knows, which is why I talked about it. I don't really use this one a whole lot. I do if I'm starting a plot and I don't really have any ideas for it yet, or I don't really know where I want it to go. I'll start with this because it's basic. It's very basic. It gives me a direction to head and a path to walk. And then this is usually how I actually plot my stories, is with the crisis arc. Because it allows you to fit in all of the rising action that you need, and you can see it all laid out and how they play on each other and how they build. So this one's really good for that. Now, last thing really bit, right here, this little bit I have right here. This again is something that not everyone learned when they learned about story arcs. So I did just want to touch on it briefly. A good story will have both a physical and emotional story arc. And if it's a really good story, they'll mirror each other. You'll have a character who is not just physically weak, but is emotionally weak, isn't super determined, isn't super pushed. He doesn't push through things. He doesn't stick with things. And so he not only has to physically become stronger so he can fight the dragon, but he also has to emotionally determine that that's what he wants. And he has to push towards it. And he has to learn determination and discipline. In romance story arcs, oftentimes you'll have the, okay, let's do with Romeo and Juliet again. The physical part was, we love each other, we want to be near each other. That's the emotional side. And then, but they are, like, he goes to visit her and they fall in love. And then, their family tells them they can't be together. And they determine, you can't be together, and they physically separate them. And you can feel the emotional pain of them being separated along with the physical. And so it's, your character needs to go through not just a story arc, but a character arc. And that's what the emotional is. The emotional is oftentimes called a character arc. And your character, in order for them to be a relatable character and for your story to really be good, they have to go through a character arc. because nobody's going to go through all the craziness you put a character in a story through and not change and not come out different and not come out better or worse. So they have to go through a story arc, and that's the emotional side of the physical. A character arc. The character arc and the story arc. And so I did briefly want to touch on that. And like I said, hopefully they'll mirror each other. Freya! Sorry, my cat's... She wants attention. Freya! Anyway. So... Okay, let's talk briefly about... Let's see what this looks like. I'm not going to write on this because this is going to be for my story arc later when I talk about it, because mine's a little bit different. So, okay, we'll talk about our poor farm boy who grew up in a farm and fought a dragon. So he's a poor farm boy. He feeds the pigs. He's not super strong. He doesn't know how to use a sword. And he gets the choice of joining this knight who needs a squire. And for whatever reason, this knight squire isn't working, but the knight really needs one, and he has no other options, and so he offers it to the stable boy. And the stable boy says, you know what? I don't like living here anymore. You know, my person who pays me to feed the pigs doesn't pay me enough. You know, why not? I'll join you. So then they join, and they go on this quest, and as they go on the quest, you know, you have the varying crises. The knight's sword is broken, and so the squire has to learn how to use his sword, and, you know, and he becomes physically stronger and going through the story arc. And as he physically grows in this, or physically, not necessarily grows, but physically moves, he doesn't have to physically grow, he can move towards the climax. He can physically move across terrain to the climax. His emotional journey will be the same. We all see it. It's that part in a movie where they do the montage with the music. That's your physical and emotional rising action. That's the I am becoming a bigger and better person. And so your arcs need to match. And so when he fights the dragon and slays the dragon, it's not just I have physically become able to slay a dragon. He also has the emotional, mental, I have become determined enough to slay a dragon, to stick with something that's incredibly difficult, like slaying a dragon, when I couldn't even stick around and feed pigs in the past. So, hopefully your character's emotional and physical journey will mirror each other and be kind of the same, kind of run parallel to one another. That's the ideal. Again, that doesn't always happen in stories. I've read stories where the characters go through a very nice story arc. And the story arc itself is not bad. And it's very well done. But they don't go through a character arc. And so the character who started at the beginning is the exact same as it is at the end. And while the story, like, you look at it and you say, okay, the story was good, but why do I feel not connected? Why does the story not really pull me? It's not bad. There's nothing about it I can point out and say it's bad. I just don't feel connected or drawn to the story. Probably because the character didn't go through a character arc. I've read stories like that, and they do leave you feeling kind of like, okay, but I don't really care. Because you don't feel anything for the character because they're flat. They don't change. And people change. So that's story arcs and a little brief stop on character arcs, because character arcs are more complicated than story arcs, and so I didn't want to dive into those real heavy. But yeah, so that was fun. On Wednesday, I will come back and I will draw you a little diagram of my story arc specifically for the novel I'm working on for NaNoWriMo. It's called Among the Sands. I don't know if I have announced that yet. I'm not super in love with the name, but it works. It works for now. It's the working title, and it sticks with a theme that I have running for the books that hopefully will follow, because I have right now the story arcs that extend past the novel I'm writing. So hopefully that'll work out. And I'll draw that on here for you guys, and I'll talk briefly about my plot without giving you any detail because I don't want to give it away. And then Friday, I'm still not sure what I'm going to talk about on Friday. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about character arcs because that is part of plotting. Maybe that's what I'll do. I don't know, but I'll try to keep it short because, again, character arcs are way more complicated than story arcs, at least for me, because it involves emotions and people making choices, and that's always way more dynamic and way more layered than story arcs are. So, I hope you all enjoyed this. I know it ran a little bit longer than I thought it did. Sorry, I get a little long-winded sometimes. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope maybe you learned something new. I kind of wanted to touch on this because I know not everybody who watches these or who reads my stuff is a writer. And not everyone has gone through some of the writing classes I've taken, and not everyone really knows all this stuff, as basic as it may seem to some of us. So, yeah, I hope you learned something new, and I hope you at least had fun listening to me talk and yell at my cat. So, yeah, I hope you all have a good day, and I will see you again on Wednesday. Bye.